Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back to Design and Dialogue. I should just add that we will only be hosting Design and Dialogue on Wednesdays going forward. We made the decision to kind of focus our efforts and alternate on Wednesdays. So next Wednesday, Glenn Adamson, my co-host, will be back with Christian Meiderstam, I think. So I'll mention that again at the end of the talk. Welcome, Jonathan Jackson from We Should Do It All. How are you, man?
Hey, having me. I'm doing well. The new year's already been a blitz, so but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you for joining us, our first guest of the new year. I'm really excited to have you here because as you and I have gotten to know each other, and I quite honestly, I've only just discovered your work last year.
Yeah.
It's been really exciting to see the breadth of your work and think
you.
about what this name means. We should do it all. Let me just say before I go into the first question, I thought we should do it all, given that friends of mine reached out to me during the movement, during the very volatile summer, which was last summer 2020, reached out and your name sort of kept coming up in terms of who's doing interesting work from the design space and from a Black-owned business. And so when I saw the name, We Should Do It All, I immediately attached that to the movement. And I was wondering, I thought, oh, we should do it all. It sounded like a very aspirational, sort of Black-owned business.
Wow, that's a new,
right?
That's a new weight. That's a new weight to the name we haven't gotten before. That's cool though. I like that.
And obviously your studio's been around a lot longer than last summer, and you've been active quite for some years now. So please, Jonathan, tell us what does We Should Do It All mean? Who's the we? What should we all be doing? What is all?
So the name actually came from a quote from a book, Time Enough for Love, written by sci-fi writer Robert Heinlein. And the quote, I can't read the full thing. I know a little bit. And it says, a human being should be able to change a diaper, con a ship, butcher a hog, change a diaper, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, act alone, cooperate. But it ends with the term specialization is for insects. So the we is just us as humans, really thinking about, and how we adapt it is really trying to think about design in multiple modes, multiple mediums, and not really feeling that we need to be held back or specialized, but really just diving in and experimenting whenever we can. So that's where the name We Should Do It All came from.
Yeah. And just by definition, you're a creative agency, but please explain a little bit more about
Yeah, so We Should Do It All as us, as a design studio in Brooklyn, New York, a team made up of 7 people currently. And my background is in architecture, and my wife, who is a partner, her background is in graphic design. And we kind of just combine those two worlds. And the team is made up of generally either architects or graphic designers, but we have brought on strategists, product designers, what have you, on a freelance basis. But it allows us to basically take on these different types of projects where we do brand identity, websites, book design, exhibition design. That's where I kind of get out the 3D juices. And recently we've done an art piece in LA, and then we're currently designing a rug for Design Within Reach. So we love not doing the same thing over and over again and taking on new challenges. Right. So yeah, that's kind of the quick gist of it.
Yeah. So I know that we've got some slides to look at, and I want to kind of get at right away how an architect became the lead of a creative agency that's doing experiential branding and digital graphics, et cetera, et cetera. So let's start to have a look at the body of work, and we can begin with you telling us a bit about your background.
Cool. We did a test earlier on Keynote, but I just want to make sure that you guys can still see the presentation. We're good? Cool.
Yeah, everything's coming across.
Awesome. So as I mentioned, team of 7 people. Just want to share that, you know, the work is done by multiple voices, multiple authors, and we find teamwork to be essential in how we approach the design process. So my partner to the right of the magenta dot, which is me. Adrian is our longest tenured worker. Chris at the bottom left from Texas, Janet from China, my Feng, and Courtney. So that's kind of how the team makeup is. And then you got the question of like how I came to be. And essentially, like, you know, we talked earlier, is like growing up in the heyday of hip hop, and you know, I'm a big sports person, and I was, you know, really influenced by these figures that you see on the screen. And the way I came to find architecture, and you see examples of Frank Lloyd Wright here and Le Corbusier, was actually through my mother, who wasn't in the arts at all. But she saw that I was drawing Nike shoes, trying to design Nike shoes, sketching a lot. And she was like, hey, you should think about architecture. And I was all of like 10 or 11 years old. And she introduced me to these books.
So this is a very diverse. Sorry, we're having a little issue with.
Sorry, say that again.
No, I was just mentioning that this is a very diverse range of influences, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this question for me of normalcy comes up, right?
Yeah,
and this idea that you know, young Black youth are not necessarily aware of the arts or of architecture or of design. And of course, it's assumed that we're aware of sport. It's assumed that we're aware of entertainment. And that has a lot to do with the spaces that African Americans have been active in and the limitations that we faced here in this country. So, you know, like myself, I became aware of architecture at around the same age, and immediately knew that, you know, I was going to move into that space of doing something in 3 dimensions. But I wasn't drawing sneakers,
yeah,
like you were.
Yeah,
but the connection I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think, you know, like I have De La and Public Enemy up, and it was like looking at those album covers, and I came to understand recently that Chuck D was doing all the album artwork for PE, and I didn't know that at first. Like he has a graphic design background, which was really interesting. But you know, like of course I wanted to be the athlete, but I always knew, like, if I could start designing shoes, I could still be tied to sport. I could still, you know, like that was my sort of connection. And then when my mom introduced me to space, like actual thinking about space differently than how we just typically live, I was like blown away. That took me to another stratosphere. So I kind of knew I wanted to go to architecture school at like 11 or 12. And then
I actually question whether or not the mind is as siloed as we think it is, right?
Yeah.
We end up specializing because of the structure of education. But in fact, you know, young people are at a very early age interested in a variety of different things, and those different influences, you know, come together and make us who we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of the structure of education, we're sort of forced into one thing or another. So you went to study architecture.
I went to Kent State in Ohio. Got an architecture degree there. My dad taught journalism there, so he introduced me to the architecture school. And we did a semester abroad in Italy. And during the first month, I came upon an architecture studio just walking, exploring the city of Florence. And it was Studio Arkea. This is their work. The top left and bottom right is the Antineri Winery on the outskirts of Florence. I ended up getting an internship there and staying longer than our semester. So I stayed 3 more months, which was amazing. And I did that model that you see at the bottom left for them as a residential building. And then what was interesting about them, you know, just thinking about trajectories, and is that they're an architecture studio traditionally, but they also produce 2 different magazines within the in-house, within the studio. So the magazine that you see there, Adia, and another one they did called Materia, which is kind of like Details magazine, where it's really just focused on a really focused scope of a building or of a structure. So they had graphic designers and writers all in house with the architects, and I was just like, okay, this is amazing. So it was a huge influence on what We Should Do It All wanted to be, where I wanted to take this idea of a design studio.
Right. Of course, I know Adia, but the idea that architects are sitting alongside writers and thinking, largely about society and the role of architecture, I think is very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So that played a huge influence on We Should Do It All, and it changed my thinking from, instead of just, architects are gonna get mad at me for saying this, but instead of just wanting to be an architect, I wanted to, I think, become something a little bit more broader, which was, to me, the term designer just fit. It painted a bigger picture for me. And one of the projects that put us on the map within the architecture world was this exhibition that we did at the Center for Architecture called New Practices New York 2008, where we did the exhibition design, branding. So what you see here is from the storefront of the gallery, a 2-story space. We did the logo of the exhibition made out of these dowel rods, these wood dowel rods. And I think there was like 1,100 of the dowel rods. So here you see the dowel rods are about a foot long, coming out of the wall, projecting out of the wall. Really an eye-grabbing moment.
But can you tell us when you actually formed the studio and how a project like this kind of came to you?
Yeah, no, thank you for redirecting me. The studio came to be in 2004, and I had worked for 2 different architecture studios. Was kind of just fed up of being, what we call a CAD monkey, where you're just working on bathrooms details, and wasn't really getting the opportunity to actually design anything, and didn't believe in having to pay dues. And I'm pretty hard-headed. So I just kind of got some graphic design projects on the side. Got one spatial project on the side, to a retail project through a friend who recommended me. And that was enough work for me to say, hey, I'm going to take my chances and just open up our own studio. And I always thought, if this doesn't work out, I feel like I'm talented enough to get another job. So why not? So that was it. I kind of just took the leap, and slowly but surely word of mouth was working for me. My wife joined full-time. Well, she joined part-time 2005 and then full-time 2009 for a project that I'll show later. But that's kind of how it came to be, is just taking a risk and believing, in oneself.
Sure. So then how did you, this is just one of the projects that came your way at that time?
Yeah, one of the projects that came our way and ended up being the first awarded project at the Center for Architecture, first exhibition that won a design award, which is pretty amazing, knowing that they have such a huge library of great exhibitions that have seen those halls. So that was pretty cool to get that.
And were you, in fact, was your studio included in this exhibition?
No.
No, did they consider We Should Do It All as an architecture firm? I mean,
no, I mean, we got pinched to, sort of like submit after doing this show. And I never thought it was quite right for us. Even though I feel like we do fit the title, I didn't feel like we had enough spatial work to be a part of the show at this moment. And I know it's still an award and still an exhibition that still happens, which is great. But yeah, we never felt like it was quite right for us to submit. Maybe, things have changed now. Yeah, it's basically a exhibition showcasing 5 practices that practice architecture, the field of architecture, slightly differently than the traditional routes. And one thing that we really wanted to do was, like, I'm always interested in process and understanding how people work and what environment are they working in. So we hired some friends of ours, some really good photographers, to go shoot each studio in their natural habitat, and what they were working on. And we did, no, you can't see my mouse, but we did little profile question and answers next to the photography for their profiles. And then we also did a booklet. But that was really the highlight, is really getting to see how these people are working. And
so in many ways, you brought this kind of multidisciplinary lens to architecture, right? This idea of storytelling, of expanding, how we present architecture, right? To something that was, I guess it sounds like it was more of almost a magazine format, but then integrated into the exhibition.
Yeah, I'm always really interested in pulling back the curtains and sharing, being transparent as much as we can. I feel like as designers, whether it be graphic or spatial architects, we oftentimes tend to just go in our corners and produce work and then show the final product. But I actually, that process is really what drives me, what I'm most interested in. I was talking to an artist last night and asking him about his process constantly, which is just really interesting to hear other people express how they go about things, and can I steal, some things in that way. Yeah. I'm going to keep going. So here you see the rods again from the logo. There's a lot of labor on that one. I'm showing the first project we did for Nike here. The way that Nike came about was really out of the blue. We got a call from one of the creative directors at North America, and he saw a project that we did on the internet and thought we might be a good fit. And I think it was the New Practices New York show. And the first assignment that we got from Nike was to think about the Flywire technology logo and how it could be applied to the shoe. In some ways a small project, but if we got the project, it would be huge because it would be on a lot of different shoes at the time. We ended up not, our design didn't get applied to the shoe, but they really liked our work, and it's been a 12-year relationship since.
So Jonathan, can you tell us what, how much work you're doing for Nike on a regular basis? Like what percentage of the studio works on Nike, for example? I know it's one of your biggest clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we have, our repeat clients would be them, the Smithsonian, and University of Pennsylvania School of Architecture. I mean, the importance of a repeat client. It's and for that to be Nike was huge for us. So the amount of work that we do for them a year, let's say we do 20 projects a year, it would probably be 7 to 8 on a typical year.
Yeah, that's substantial. So what do you think, I mean, in your own words, what do you think they saw in that architecture exhibition, which combined graphics, which combined three-dimensional signage, which combined the storytelling that you mentioned, the documentation of architects, et cetera? What do you think they saw in that work that gave them the sense that you could work on sportswear and on an athletic-driven brand?
Yeah, I think there's a translation, maybe through, there's a stealthness and a contemporariness within that New Practices show that, like how the typography was handled. I mean, honestly, black and white are like, it's just it's really easy, but when it's done, it's beautiful. Like, you do things in black and white and, it'll get a lot of attention. So I think, it's an easy draw. I think, shout out to Kevin Willihan. That was the creative director that spotted us. But I think he saw the potential to work with a younger team at that time, that was fresh. I think we were sort of just like wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, and really, I think maybe he saw some flexibility too, where we could take on many different roles. And that's what he did with us. Like, we started off with this logo, then we went to t-shirts, and then I kind of tapped him and said, hey, my background is architecture. We can take on some spatial stuff too. If you have that come your way. And he said, oh, okay, bet. And the first project he gave us was a 23,000 square foot space in South Africa for the World Cup.
Wow.
So,
That's
yeah.
incredible. So were you, I'm curious about, because of the scale of the work that you're doing for Nike and the things that we'll talk about later, I'm curious about that interview process and how much of your identity played a role in Nike choosing you.
Yeah, so everything, he was in Portland. Everything was over a phone call. There was no Zoom. That interview process was essentially like, hey, I like your work. I would love to try you guys out for a logo project. It wasn't like what we typically do. The process was not a great story in the sense of him knowing necessarily that it's a Black owned studio or what have you. It was more of I want to tap you. Let's see if this works. And if it does, I want to keep coming back. Me growing up with such a Nike influence was huge for me. I told you I was designing shoes. So it was like, oh my gosh, I called my mother right after. There was two projects in this world that I thought were the most daunting, and it was this Flywire project and then the museum in DC. And it's because of the weight that or the status that I held Nike at that time is, I felt the pressure right away.
Sure. And that speaks volumes for the power of the brand in the Black community in America, right? I think, of course, we'll have to touch upon that. But let's continue.
Yes. So this is a glimpse at the project in South Africa. It was in Durban, South Africa. We spent 2 weeks there working, 1 week there sort of vacationing, discovering. It was a really great place to explore.
And what was the brief?
The brief was for the World Cup. The Right the Future campaign was centered around Nike football or soccer, and we had to design 5 different rooms, each expressing. One room was just about one type of shoe. Another room was sort of the auditorium space. We also designed this tunnel, which you see on the top right, as the entryway moment. And then I'm forgetting, another room was about these new jackets that they were doing. So each room was a different presentation. So they had different aesthetics, different scopes. But we had to sort of reinvent the wheel for 5 different rooms. It went really well. It was one of those projects where, I understood how powerful Nike was, but to design a space that big, have the presentation, so they had their VPs talk and what have you. The presentations were probably a total of 2 hours. So we had 100 retailers from all over the globe come here. Presentation to them was for 2 hours. The space goes down just like that. And, it's millions of dollars spent and it's done. You spent, as a team, we spent, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 months going hard on this. And then it's up for 2 hours and gone. And
wow.
Yeah.
And how many of these, just give us a sense of how many of these sort of experiential marketing activations is Nike doing around the world? Would you know that kind of information? How often they're doing these kinds of things?
No, there's so many teams, there's so many categories. So if you can imagine, most of the categories of the 4 major sports are doing things like this globally. So I couldn't give you that number. I'm not quite sure, but I would say quite a bit. Over 100, 150 of these events a year, I would imagine, pre-COVID, of course.
And did you feel like this was the kind of ideal project for your team, because it's combining on some level a kind of micro-architectural moment, branding, graphics, et cetera, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. This was where we wanted to be. Exactly, because it was getting out all these different expressions at the same time from a flat and depth point of view. This is exactly where we wanted to be. And I think this was a catalyst for us. Without this project, we don't get the museum in DC. This was a major, the fact that Ralph Applebaum and Associates saw that Nike trusted us with a square footage of this size was a huge thing in the interview process.
Yeah, and so you're referring to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, of which you designed, I believe, a whole floor. Let's continue.
So on to that project. We got interviewed for this in 2009. Ralph Applebaum and Associates decided to open up the floor. And I think this goes to the fact that they probably didn't have enough people of color to work on this project. In full transparency. We were grateful. This is a project of a lifetime for us. And we got the interview. They saw the Nike work, they saw some of the smaller exhibitions and felt comfortable enough for us to handle a whole floor. So what we got to do.
Just a little background for our listeners, I should mention, obviously it's the National Museum of African American History and Culture, designed by David Adjaye and Bond Associates, and Ralph Applebaum and Associates are the world's, premier museum exhibition design firm. And so they were, commissioned to design all of the exhibition spaces, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah.
And then they tapped We Should Do It All, Jonathan and his team, to design is it the 4th floor exhibition space?
Ours is the 3rd floor. They also tapped, I think Yolanda Daniels, Studio Sumo.
Yeah, of course.
She worked on the 4th floor initially. So they tapped art studios to do those floors, while Applebaum and Associates worked on the mezzanine levels, which is the bigger ones, like Slavery to Freedom. That was the, I think there's 90,000 square feet of exhibition space. And I think that was 50,000 of it. So
how much exhibition space and square footage were you working on?
About 25,000 square feet, give or take. We got the project in 2010. We worked on some strategy stuff with Applebaum in the beginning. I like to say that we were the impetus for them going even deeper to create that. I don't know if you've visited the space, but it goes down pretty far. But that idea of climbing the mountaintop as a metaphor from MLK was, we initially thought we were going to get a slave ship, and we thought, let's go even deeper to have that float in this space. But we ended up keeping that depth, and it worked out pretty well.
So can you explain a little more, just for our audience, how the museum is organized, and then what the themes and topics of your floor?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way the museum works is that mezzanine level, which you're seeing here, is the Slavery to Freedom galleries. So you take a massive elevator down to the bottom. Mm-hmm. It drops you off to when Africans were brought over in slave ships to America, and it's a really tight space on purpose. You're supposed to feel the squeeze. It's a metaphor for the slave ships. And as you continuously walk through history, the space starts to slowly open up for you. But it's so much content. So this is that mezzanine level. As you go up, you eventually on this floor, you get to Obama in 2008. Our floor, you don't see here, but when you go up the escalators, it's the 3rd floor, and it's sports, military, power of place, and Making a Way Out of No Way gallery. Yeah. And our approach to this floor was, we tried to break it down into basically 3 different themes, where we looked at view sheds, which was really kind of creating these perspective views to particular major moments. The one that you see in the middle was this idea of cores, where the green is, you're walking through a series of smaller exhibition spaces, and then when you get to these sort of oval-like shapes, it opens up not only spatially, but vertically as well. And then the last one, sort of the Voices Pathway, which is the one that we ended up going with. was creating
Can you
a central path.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship to the curator and the kind of curatorial project, and how much input your studio had? I can imagine, obviously, as a Black designer, right, a project of this scale and with this kind of historic weight, must have been critically important. And I guess I'm curious how much of a role you had in the in thinking about how the spaces were planned and organized. And
so 12 curators total on the project, and we work with 5 on our floor alone. Maybe there's more total, but 5 curators on our floor alone, and there's meetings every week with each one of them. And when it came to our roles and responsibilities, Applebaum, we would do these check-ins every week, but they were letting us drive it, which was amazing. And the agreement that we had with them was that we would work on this project to the end of design documentation phase, and then they would take over. And that was something that we were really comfortable with. And so we worked on this project for 3.5 years or so. But lots of dialogue with the curators. I think you can't do a good exhibition without having that one-to-one communication with them. So when it came to scheming and understanding how the exhibitions would work, it was a constant back and forth. Here you're seeing an older model just in the beginnings of how we were thinking about this path as a connective thread to each gallery. And that connective pathway, that thread, is the making a way out of no way gallery, which we took as the metaphor for the whole museum. So it's the gallery that connects sports, connects military, and connects power of place, which is, it puts the visitor in particular time and space within American history. So we had,
it's really about framing the accomplishments of Black people in America against the struggles, right? That
absolutely,
obviously we had to overcome, and then showing their accomplishments in these different arenas. Is that right?
Exactly. That making a way out of no way gallery was full of unsung heroes. That's the beauty about working on exhibitions, is that we get to learn so much. I didn't know the Tulsa story, unfortunately, until we worked on this museum. So much gratitude and for the time spent on this project. So even when we were developing the making out of no way skin, what you see here, 4 different examples, it was constantly each, I'm going to call them cells, is a different story, and working with the curator about, no, this is too high, so this has to, we did a lot of shifting, and but it's basically a development of a skin that has different depths to hold different content, some flat and some really deep. So when you walk up to that 3rd floor, this is the first thing that you see.
So were you involved in actually helping organize the visual and graphic content as well as the design of that content, or give us a sense of how this?
So from our role point of view, primarily it was more on the exhibition design, so like more architectural, but we did have a graphic component where we started to set templates, and Applebaum either ran with them or redid them themselves. But our primary role for this was more exhibition design and less exhibition graphics.
And was there an overall museum creative director? I mean, is there anyone in the role of kind of overseeing how something like your floor relates to the floor above it, Yolanda Daniels' work, et cetera?
So on the Applebaum side, yes, for sure. We would answer to Melanie Ide, who's moved on. She's now working on a museum. She's the director of a museum in Hawaii now, but she would be our leader on the Applebaum side. And then, I don't know if you're familiar with Lonnie Bunch, but he's kind of taken over as the director of the Smithsonian as a whole, but he had a huge imprint on who was doing what and how they were doing it. And him being really tied to each and every exhibition within the show, he had a very strong team with him. But yeah, he was sort of the person that we all answered to when it came to these exhibitions. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm looking at your work, and of course, I remember most intensely the lower floors because of how, how emotionally powerful they were. But I also remember how graphically intense they were. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I remember seeing text printed almost near the floor. There was so much information, and I believe this is one of the critiques of the exhibition, is that there was so much of a story to be told, and so much of it was told graphically through print that it's a bit difficult to kind of follow. So, I mean, how do you feel about that, and thinking about the content that you had to organize?
Yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. And I think most of the design team would probably agree with you. There's always, in exhibitions, as you know, there's always a battle between the designer and the curator, in the sense of how much and how we show it. And we tried to pick our battles, and we lost a lot. And we really fought hard on this floor also to have a space of reflection where you could just sit and not think about anything, nothing in front of you.
Right.
But we lost that battle. And I think that museum, it has one grand moment like that, but I think it needs more pockets of those like quieter moments where there's just nothing and you're just taking everything in because you've seen a lot.
Yeah, it's difficult to explain to people who haven't been there. And I mean, the work that we're seeing now helps, but you know, there's so much of an emotional burden that you carry, especially as a Black American, seeing all of this. And for many of us, given the lack of education in America around African American history, this is that education, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're encountering information in many cases for the first time. You're encountering the exhibition of information in relation to other moments for the first time, and it's a very challenging amount of information. And so I those moments of reflection are super important.
Yeah, definitely agree. But yeah, this was a huge learning experience for us. I think, you know, working with Applebaum and Associates, they taught us a level of professionalism that we necessarily didn't have before. And
have any direct dialogue with the architect, David Adjaye?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I think We Should Do It All were probably a part of 5 or 6 initial meetings, sometimes at David's office, sometimes in DC with Lonnie. But yeah, you know, for the most part, Adjaye and Associates provided a shell, and you know, it was sort of a clean slate for Applebaum and Associates, ourselves, and Studio Sumo to like really orchestrate how these exhibitions were going to work within this beautiful shell. So, you know, when it came to digging deeper, like Adjaye and Associates were a huge driver for advocating for that. So yeah, there was a good amount of dialogue with them. I think Applebaum and Associates had more than us directly, but yeah, I got to talk to him a few times. Yeah. So I want to jump to another project that was a huge influence in us in thinking about strategy. We Mean Business, East New York Unite to Stay, was a project with the LDC of East New York and AIGA New York. We got tapped by AIGA to work on this project. And it was essentially about the rezoning of East New York, and how everything from an awareness and education point of view was always from a residential viewpoint. And we recognize that businesses are going to be suffering quite a bit in this too. And the goal was basically to form a coalition that could create one strong voice that could basically speak to city officials and express what they needed, and knew that the rezoning was going to happen. couldn't necessarily stop it, but let's get something for them out of this. And
just for a little bit of context, Jonathan, how would you describe the neighborhood of East New York?
Yeah, East New York. I mean, I think it's down home. Like when you think about New York and the grittiness, and I think, you know, slowly losing it now, but
Yeah.
as every neighborhood is. But East New York is that. It's black, it's brown, it's untapped in many ways, or at least it was. And in that untappedness, that's where it was, you know, quite beautiful.
Untapped meaning undeveloped.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
from a commercial and
yes, thank you. Yes, from a commercial point of view, exactly.
Yeah.
And
lacking in sort of contemporary investment, let's say, right?
exactly. And when it does happen, or when it did happen, you know, there was sort of a lack of checking to make sure that East New Yorkers could stay in East New York, right? So this project was bringing that level of awareness to the business owners and locals there. And, you know, I'm from New York. AIGA is an established place or institution in New York, but East New Yorkers don't need or didn't want necessarily to see our faces there to come help them, right? Like what do they need help with? So trying to really recognize that relationship and understanding how we can be beneficial was basically meeting and talking to some people, like, who are the neighborhood people that we need to know?
So who are your clients, in a sense, right? Who
yeah,
are you
exactly.
working for?
Exactly.
What role sorry. I was going to ask what role
I was just going to say,
there's a little bit of a delay. Apologies. I just wanted to ask, what role did the American Institute of Graphic Arts play in this project? I mean, why was the AIGA contacted to participate?
So this is a particular group within AIGA New York. I think it came out of Leticia Wolf was the main driver, and she's not necessarily connected to AIGA New York. She doesn't work for them, but
yeah, Leticia's a consultant, right?
Yeah, exactly. And she was the main driver, and she was honestly the leader in like making sure that if AIGA New York is going to be participating in this project, let's do it right. And you know, I'm not sure how AIGA came to be within this project. I know that the group that she was working with was more like doing community-based work in general. So I think East New York was, you know, a part of like an initiative a lot like many other neighborhoods in New York. So that's how they basically came to be a part of the project. And then tapping the LCD of East New York was important too. They were the people that led us to finding who we call the neighborhood ambassadors. Those were the people that everyone knew, and if they were doing something, then the rest of the neighborhood wanted to be a part of it as well. So basically, the project was create a series of posters, an awareness poster, a booklet, and form a coalition of business owners that basically could formulate a voice to speak to city officials. As simple as that. And you know, the graphics were the graphics, but I expressed to you earlier, the main takeaway from this project for me was understanding that the process of empowering a group of people to be able to speak to who they needed to speak to was the real design meat of the project. And as a studio, we got so much out of this. And here you're seeing some of the posters and at a rally in City Hall. But
it makes me think about the design of activism, right?
Exactly. And really tapping these seven sort of neighborhood ambassadors was essential for us to get a foot in the door and be taken as legitimate in a way. Like if they were on board, then, you know, a lot of the neighborhood would follow. And it turned out to be a project I don't think that is living necessarily anymore, but for like a good year and a half, 2 years, there was a strong conversation between the neighborhood of East New York and city developers. Like city developers were forced to be able to hear their voice through city officials. And I think that did have an impact on the amount of percentage of apartments, low-income apartments that would remain in this that neighborhood, and then also businesses that were kept through all this rezoning. So a really important project for us, and some of the processes we've taken and adapted for lots of projects that have come our way.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how powerful it is for these people to be given dignity, first of all, through the photography, and then to be quote unquote branded, right? To have their cause designed.
Yeah.
And that image that you showed where they were holding hand-drawn posters next to your, I mean, I think this speaks to the community development aspect of the project, which is quite powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a great one for us, and we've kind of taken some things and moving forward with it. I'm going from a community-based project to a major corporation project, and I feel like that's kind of the dichotomy of the studio too. Is like we move between these, we oscillate between these two worlds, and it's been beneficial for us in learning from each. So this is the Nike headquarters in New York. It opened in 2017. They had a previous headquarters, but it was in the Google building, and then Google was expanding and they pushed everybody out. So Nike found a new building in, I want to say Koreatown area.
So down in the 30s, I suppose?
Yeah, 32nd maybe. So the major themes of the project was how can we tie Nike to the Nike brand to the New York brand, and those and what is that relationship in thinking about sport in New York.
And was this an architectural assignment or an environmental graphics assignment?
So this for us was environmental graphics with a little hint of spatial work, and I'll show some of that too. But we work with studios, architects in New York. Did most of the architectural work. And each floor has a different theme. So as you sort of walk up to the space, there's these grand stairways. Was sort of the theme of coming out of the tunnel to go play. And if you look at the left image, on the right side of that image is the basketball court. So we were taking these things that New York has, like when you go to the parks, the chain link fence, the tiles in the subway. So readapting these New York City icons and placing them in the space, even like the idea of raw concrete, this being the concrete jungle city. So these ideas, and then hand painted typography. We did a custom typeface for this. We work with a few different artists where if we weren't doing the environmental graphic ourselves, we work with creative director Michael Spojeric out of Nike, in helping him figure out who else could we tap to work on this, which was a lot of fun.
That choice of the material palette, et cetera, was that a collaboration with the architects, or were the architects dictating that?
That was a conversation between the three different entities of studios, Nike, and ourselves. Just like a concrete structured building, but there's like a grayness to this office that we feel like that New York City can be, and we didn't necessarily deviate from that, but sometimes the graphics do pop a little bit. So this was our sort of architectural moment of the project. It's the bleachers on the basketball court, and working with Michael, he was like, I want the bleachers to be graphic. And a good friend of mine, we collaborate all the time, Corey Yorkovich, came up with this idea of like basketball net as structure, and then the wood sitting flush with the structure. So that gray that you're seeing is actually the structure of the bleacher. You can see sort of a kid arts drawing here.
It gives the impression of being almost shadows, right? Broken across the
Exactly.
So there's a full-size basketball court in their headquarters. Is that right?
Full size, high school size, but not
Okay.
NBA size.
Okay.
Yeah, we tried so many different ways to get a full size, and it just wasn't working out. But yeah, but nonetheless, really special to play on. Yeah, we keep going. So each floor has a theme. This floor that you see on the left is the basketball theme floor. Michael Jordan in the kitchen, the tiles. Again, tapping into New York City tiles. And then on the right is sort of an homage to Nike running in Oregon running team. We had an artist actually like scratch out of the wood panels the logo, and those are actually wood panels that I traveled to North Carolina to hand pick. So it was a lot of fun. Just, you know, we'll talk about Nike, but one thing they've given us is the room to experiment quite a bit, and we're forever grateful for that, for sure. Within the conference rooms, the ceiling is sound deafening tiles. They're depicting the soles of some popular shoes. So on the left is the Air Force One shoe on repeat pattern, and then the Hyper Dunk on the right. And then thinking about this idea of like tiles again, but you know, what are the hieroglyphics of basketball? Like what is the line work like? And like really, this was one of my favorite moments of the space, are designing these tiles for both the running floor and the basketball floor. So just taking these different symbols of the sport and line work and protruding them out.
It's very interesting to think about how a brand like Nike, in a sense, mines its own content, and the studio, the creative studios they're working with, mine their own, you know, that same content to then give it back in terms of these permanent installations and retail and experiential moments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been quite the journey with them, and again, we've gotten to work on the full breadth of what they do. Yeah, so to be tapped for this was a pretty special for us as well. This is, I mentioned before, we did a custom typeface for the signage, and we really wanted to, you know, ADA code, you have to use Braille for particular signs, but what we did was we developed a system. Those lines separating the different names are Braille fixtures, and we didn't need it on this particular sign, but it worked out graphically for us so much that we wanted to keep it in really thinking about the idea of full integration and not thinking about ADA as a tap-on or an add-on.
Universal access.
Exactly.
So Jonathan, just so we have time for questions, we better pick up the pace.
Gotcha. More tiles, and collaborated with artists, really great artists, Carolina Muscushko from Portugal. She's in New York. She's an architect, and she draws everything through AutoCAD, which is crazy. So here on the right, you see the whole city in the New York City Marathon happening. Yeah, really talented person. Should we show the video or keep going?
A
little bit.
Sure. Is this a Kendrick Lamar soundtrack?
Yeah, bitch, don't kill my vibe. Yeah, the credit is at the end of the film, but it's really dope, jazzy take.
That's great.
So, you know, that leads me to sort of a heartbreaking moment for me, because as someone who is so tied to the brand from early childhood to now, a lot of our projects are with the company, is really just disappointed in what the approach was when it came to addressing the anti-racial commercial or anti-racist commercial they put out back in the summer, in June or July. So what you see on the left is a story.
Nike's reaction to George Floyd. Is that what you're referring to?
Thank you. Yes, exactly. What you see on the left is a story that I took over the We Should Do It All it said how disappointed I was with the commercial and how it felt like it was an all lives matter statement that Nike put out. And I, as a company that has embedded themselves in Black culture, used it, it was really just disappointing for them to take that approach. And I kind of just needed to share it. And I didn't care if they didn't work with us again because of this, but it just needed to be said.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because obviously, and you've given some statistics before, but maybe you could repeat them here. The majority of athletes in most of the teams, the majority of athletes that Nike is sponsoring, et cetera, are all Black. So it's kind of impossible to imagine that they would take a back seat to the very important moment in the movement that was happening last summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when it comes to the superstar athletes that Nike has on contract, I have to believe it's like 95% are Black, the superstars. And it was just a huge misstep. They just did it wrong. And then a friend, Kendall Henderson, who has a studio in New York, and then another friend, Bijan, who runs Fist Gallery and Fist Projects. We put together, Kendall being the lead, this letter that was sent to Nike and went to top to bottom, went to as many people as we could find, but we definitely went to the executive level just to start a conversation about how we felt, not only about what the ad was doing, but Nike in general, like understanding like the lack of Black employees within the creative teams there.
So Jonathan, this is obviously very hard to read.
Yes.
Is it possible for you to read maybe just the first paragraph?
I gotta move your faces are in my way, and I don't see them out.
I don't even see my face anymore.
Can I? Oh, sorry. I can't. I would have to get out of the presentation.
Okay.
Essentially, what we were saying is we were unfulfilled with Nike's approach to Black people, Black culture, employment of Black people, investment in Black people, and what is the company going to do moving forward to address these issues? And because of this letter, we've had some talks, some dialogue with some executives at Nike. We're still not happy necessarily, but we have so many inside knowledge that we understand that the wheels are in motion. And while those executives are not constantly talking to us, we are getting filtered information from some other people that saying that they're putting together some programming. They're looking at how they address hiring.
Yeah, but even even
still
before,
need to.
There's a lot to be done for sure. But even before George Floyd, right, there's been a criticism of Nike and a criticism of many of these sports brands for the exploitation of athletes, et cetera. And so there's also this notion of brands parachuting into disadvantaged neighborhoods and throwing up a quick activation, some of which you may have been involved in designing, and then sort of capitalizing on that exposure, capitalizing on that cultural, temporary cultural relationship, right, without necessarily giving back. I did some research into how Nike has given back and what the Nike Foundation does. And of course, they give a lot of free product. They've done during the pandemic, they've given away equipment and protective gear, et cetera. But what's interesting is that these brands don't lead with these efforts, and these efforts aren't permanent and long-term. So,
I think to your point, for me, with it, whether it be Nike, Adidas, whatever, is like really kind of letting go of sport, and like you have that, you can do that in your sleep when it comes to talking to the community.
Right.
Let go of sport and get in another way, where it's long-term investment, not only in the youth, but from a creative point of view, and thinking about whatever it is, if you did need to tap them into sport, instead of having, I don't know, an athlete come do a workshop, Have one of your creatives come to a high school or middle school and teach them about design. You know, like I think there's many modes of like real investment into the community that
obviously. It's I think it's a philosophical perspective, and it comes from this position of you know, considering the Black America as being monolithically interested in sport, and not seeing the range of diverse opportunities that a brand like Nike could be creating, right?
Exactly.
So obviously Nike is a fashion brand first, an athletic brand second, but it's a cultural phenomenon when it comes to the fact that, I mean, you can't even say the percentage of people that wear Nikes every day, from grandmothers to babies, right? And there isn't enough transparency about their relationship to the community, their relationship to sustainability, and you could go down the list. And I think the reckoning that was last summer was very important in a sense for all of us in terms of rethinking our relationships to one another, et cetera. So, absolutely. You know, I appreciate the letter, and I hope you can keep the pressure up to see.
And I think even internally, we are thinking about how we want to work with corporations moving forward. You know, I think moving forward, it's important for us, if a team from Nike or Pepsi reach out to us, we need to see a woman on the team. We need to see Black people on the team, people of color on the team. Otherwise, I think we're going to be not taking on that project.
And I know that, I mean, we talked about this, but since last summer, we both have gotten quite a lot of calls. And I mean, okay, we can say that it's about time, you know, and we can obviously assume that those calls weren't happening for the wrong reasons before. But it's also a question of the projects that, you know, are coming from the right place, and the projects that you choose to take. So reframing those in terms of what's good for our communities and the types of people we want to collaborate with, I think it's a proper way to approach it.
Absolutely.
So Jonathan, we're running out of time. I mean, we're past time. We don't have any questions yet, but I would love to see the Men of Change project, because I think
absolutely
very powerful. If everyone would just like to stay with us maybe 5 minutes more, Jonathan can take us through this last project.
I'll breeze through this. So this is the Men of Change exhibition put on by the Smithsonian. It's a traveling show for a particular group within Smithsonian called SITES, Traveling Exhibition Services. My 4-year-old just entered the room. Let's be so we developed the identity, which was meant to be as flexible as possible. And the show is essentially about 25 African American men who changed American history. Almost done.
He's aware of the clock, I suppose.
Very much aware. The exhibition is built around 7 themes of storytelling, myth breakers, catalysts, fathering, loving, community builders, and each one of these get an arc, and those arcs provide didactic information about these 25 different men. And one of the things that we were really amped about and brought to the table for this project was thinking about how we can go even deeper with storytelling, and we curated this aspect of the show where we brought 25 different artists to depict the 25 different men, which was amazing. I'm going to breeze through this really quickly. And 2 examples of the artwork that was done by, here on the left, Robert Pruitt depicting Ta-Nehisi Coates. And then Nina Chanel Abney doing Andrew Young.
I should mention that Andrew Young is my cousin.
What?
Yeah, it's great to see cousin Andrew there.
Oh, wow.
I wish I could afford that painting there. I wish I could. Jonathan, you have to tell me how I can get a hold of that.
I'll send you a JPEG.
I want the real thing.
That's on loan. Nina loaned that to the Smithsonian. It's traveling.
It's fantastic. So it makes me think about Hank Willis Thomas's Question Bridge project.
He's in the show too, I should mention,
from some years back where he actually interviewed quite a number of those people, including Andrew Young. So it's I think it's powerful in your relationship of the artist, the artwork to history, and how you choose to kind of bring that forward for a new generation. So yeah, I think that's quite interesting. So Jonathan, I think we get you might have to leave it there, huh?
Yeah, understood.
But listen, thank you so much for this really insightful conversation and great look at your work.
Thank you for the opportunity, Stephen. Really appreciate this, and let's stay in contact.
Yeah, of course. You and I will continue to talk offline. Nice to meet you, little man.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, everyone. One last bit of housekeeping. Lucy, can you remind us of